For everybody who doesn't know, and you probably should if you've been watching this podcast long enough, Trent is not only my friend, he is my go-to on anything optics related or camera related, sometimes politics related, but we're not getting into that.
We're not going to do that. We're not
getting into that. What I want to talk with you today, Trent, is, by the way, thank you everybody who's watching and listening to the podcast. Again, like, share, subscribe. That's all we ask you to do. But Trent, as you know, I am your buddy who always has to ask you, explain things to me like I'm 5. And we've talked about optics a lot when I'm talking about binoculars and rifle scopes. Today I want to talk about rifle scopes primarily. You know, okay, so I think if anybody knows anything about optics, for the most part, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a couple companies in the world that actually make the components.
Yeah.
And the difference when you come into a company like Right-On, which I've used the scopes now for all those TV hunts. Last year, you're going to be seeing me killing a bunch of deer on TV this year with them. We talk about glass, and we talked about that last time on the podcast, which is number one, right? Glass is number one when it comes to rifle scope. But when we also talk about scopes, what separates the good from the bad when it comes to the chassis, when it comes to the accessories, when it comes to the things that actually make up the scope itself?
Touch on that first part real quick, too, is, you know, it's true of optics, right? There's only so many suppliers, but it's true of pickup trucks. It's true of, like, we're not going to, this isn't political, but you hear a lot of talk right now about semiconductors and chips. Same thing. The phones, the microphones, the everything needs these chips, right? Apple doesn't have its own chip factory, and Sam's they're going to chip suppliers. So it doesn't matter really what product you're talking about. I drive a Chevy, or I drive a Ford, or I drive a Dodge.
That's a good point.
There's a single forge that makes those engine blocks or those bolts or whatever. Like, at some point, it's the way those components are assembled and the specific constellation of features and benefits that generates that dictates, is that the right product for you or your application? You know, I've used this example before of the wrong question to ask, right? We talked about it last time as it relates to glass, but it applies to everything else as well. Trent, I just bought a new 30-06. What scope do I need on it? That's not the right question to ask. The right optic is dictated by use. Are you going to take that 30-06 and try to shoot 1,500 yards? Or are you taking that 30-06 on a bear hunt? Those are two very different things.
Right.
So we talked about it last time as it relates to glass, but everything else too, the turrets, the chassis, all of those things. You know, in the last 15 years, when I really kind of first got into this industry, everybody wanted a 1-inch scope. It had to be a 1-inch scope. Everybody wanted 1-inch scopes. And at the time, if you were trying to push a 30 millimeter scope on somebody, there was a lot of pushback. Nobody wanted that. Now, 30 millimeters almost become the standard, and you see people going to 34s and even higher diameter tubes. And there's a misconception that it offers you a lot more ability to dial, more adjustment. Potentially, yes. It's usually the amount is normally overstated. If you were to take a 1-inch internal, because for those of you that don't know, the glass that you see on both ends is only a portion of the glass that's in there. Your erector system is what moves when you change your magnification and everything else, and you've got more lenses in there, which is essentially a tube within a tube. So if you take a 1-inch erector tube and put it in a 34 millimeter chassis tube, you've got a lot more room to be able to move stuff around. But if you're matching your internal components to your external diameters, then it's a ratio. So you might get marginal more adjustment, but not significant more. What a larger tube allows you to do is allows you to use a larger erector system, which uses larger internal lenses, which doesn't transmit more light, but it helps with light management. So that's something that it's glass adjacent, because you have to talk about, at the end of the day, all those other components, whether it's the turrets, whether it's the tube diameter, whether it's whatever, parallax adjustment or illumination, all of those things, at some point it's going to go back to, it can't take away from the optical performance, which is tied to the glass, or ideally it should enhance it. So do you want exposed or capped turrets? Do you want, what kind of a reticle do you want? Do you want a single aim point, because where you can single aim hold for pretty much everything, or do you need a graduated reticle? Do you want a mill reticle that is used for really more for ranging and measuring, or do you want a ballistic reticle that's specifically calibrated for bullet drop? Those are two very different things. And tube diameter is a big one. And we'll start there, the chassis, just because, I wrote the article for Deer and Deer Hunting, and it's one of my absolute favorite things that I've ever written.
It's on our website. We'll put a link to it in the comments here.
The optics trade-off.
Yep.
Everybody wants a 1:30 by 24 that weighs 8 ounces and is 11 inches long. That is the ideal rifle scope, and optical physics tell you that can't be the case. So do you want to go to, is weight a consideration, right? That's going to dictate a lot of things for you. That's probably going to put you in a 1 inch if you want to get really militant about lightweight, or you can still do a lightweight option in a 30 millimeter, but you're probably not going to go to a 34. You're probably going to try to stay at a 44 millimeter objective as opposed to a 50 or a 56. Your turrets, there's not a lot of change there, but if you're hunting and you're hiking across a mountain, do you want those capped so that you know that they're secure, or do you want them open where you brush up on a tree and 6 clicks,
yep, and
now you're off? All of those things go to that specific constellation of what you end up with. Well, this is a 4-16 or a 5-25 rifle scope in 30 millimeter, but there can still be drastic differences in the way that is configured to be what it is that you want it to be.
That is some interesting stuff, and you almost, as an optics buyer, you either need somebody at the counter who knows what you know, which
is tough to find.
You don't get that. You get some guy looking down his glasses saying, no, you got to buy this one.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing, which, you use that analogy, but it's the same thing with let's just keep it within the hunting, like a crossbow or a bow, what you have to decide first, what type of hunter are you, or what type of hunting are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going to say the model because I'm 99% sure I know it. The model I'm using is the...
I think you've got 2, but I think you're using the 5 Primal 2-12.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say Primal, but I'm like, I don't want to mess up on this.
Yep.
That one is specifically built for me because the throw lever, is that what you call it? That thing is so easy. Now, if I'm hunting in a Midwest situation, I can get on it fast and crank that up fast or down fast. Now, am I going to want the same thing if I'm hunting, a Western environment? Probably not, because that's a situation where I'm going to want the multi-reticles. So that my point there is, answer those questions first before you go shopping, and then educate yourself on, okay, now this is the ballpark I'm playing in. What are the options within that?
I always tell people the 2 questions that matter, and when they ask me the wrong question, my response is, what are you going to do with it? How much do you want to spend?
Right.
Because budget, that, like it or not, that's ultimately a determining factor. Bows, crossbows, camo, handguns.
You guys have changed that a lot, though, because
it
used to be the rule of thumb was like, well, you better be spending as much on that scope as you are on the rifle. You don't have to do that anymore.
But okay, yes.
And I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true.
No, I'm going to put it back to you as you used to have to spend $1,000 to get a decent rifle.
True. Yeah.
Have you shot? Same thing. I don't want
No, you're right. You're right.
And this, I wrote a review for a rifle for a magazine, not Deer and Deer Hunting, deepest apologies. And but it was about one of the new, I call them the budget rifles,
right.
but I'm right on the edge of coming into the industry when like the Remington 783 came out, which was when the Ruger American first came out, when the Savage 110 came out. And I remember, for those of us of a certain age, like this was you mean I can get a roughly MOA performing rifle with an adjustable trigger and all of this stuff that is just taken for granted as baseline performance today was revolutionary 12 years ago, 15 years ago. So, yeah, everything, economies of scale dictates that the more popular something gets, TVs. My first plasma TV weighed like 80 pounds and cost $600.
Right.
I can walk into Walmart right now and buy a 70-inch flat screen that weighs 40 pounds. I can lift it with one hand.
And it costs
and
like
it's $300.
$300, yeah.
So
we've
yes.
actually seen that. That's another good parallel, is we've seen that with all things in the hunting industry and optics.
You used to have to spend $2,000 to get a really good rifle. So then, I better spend $2,000 to put a good scope on this great rifle.
You don't need to do that anymore.
Now, I can go buy $750 every day will buy you a rifle that shoots better than you, and you can now put a scope that will pair with that rifle to shoot better than you are capable of. This is something most people don't want to hear. I've spent a lot of time on the range with a lot of people, and we're all guilty of being on the internet and getting caught. There are way more sub-MOA gun setups than there are sub-MOA shooters. You don't want to hear that, person listening to the podcast, but I promise an hour on the range with someone that's really good will shrink your groups by half because you're not as good a shooter as you think you are.
So what are you seeing? What is the trend for deer hunting, specifically with optics?
Bigger tubes, multi-reticles, longer range.
Why? Is it just because people think that's cool, or?
I think, the better the rifle, the more accurate. Accuracy has gotten cheaper, along with everything else. It used to be, you can only be so accurate throwing pumpkin ball slugs in northern Indiana 30 years ago. Well, now we're a rifle state. So there's some change to that. The way we hunt has changed a little bit, but the ability of the products has made people want to test it. I use the example all the time, specifically as it relates to 6.5 Creedmoor. This is not
that's what I was going to ask.
This is not universally 6.5 related, but I draw the analogy to archery. We all the time talk about hunters. Well, I practice at 80 and 100 yards, but I would never shoot a deer at that distance. Right. But that makes 40 feel really easy.
Yep.
As accuracy, 30 years ago, nobody wanted to take a 308 and just be lobbing them downrange at 800 yards, missing everything. That's not fun. They'd shoot at 50 and okay, good enough, right? But as the guns have gotten better, as the ammo has gotten better, as the optics have gotten, as all of that has gotten better, and we've seen these new cartridges, that whole 6mm family, and they're still. We have a new one yesterday, the 7mm backcountry that just came out. So, as that became more popular, you're seeing, and we're getting ready to launch a new what we call a crossover scope. That is kind of a blend of a hunting or long range scope, because if I've got a 6.5 Creedmoor and I only am ever going to shoot deer at 200, 250 yards, using that bow hunting analogy, why would I not go to the range where I can shoot 5 or 7 or 1,000 yards?
Great analogy.
And know that I can test myself. Because I've used the air gun example, right? Air guns are super, whether you hunt with them or not, you should be using them as a practicing and training tool because they are so repeatable, especially at small distances. These serious air gun competitions, they put a 22 caliber pellet through a 25 caliber hole. And if you impact the steel, it's think about that for a second. 0.03 of an inch of variance. And they're putting pellets through a hole That they are that good. Get a basic air rifle, go out to your backyard and start shooting at even 10, 15, 20 yards. If there's something you're screwing up, you'll find it for pennies compared to lobbing $100, $1.50, $2, $3 rounds downrange.
One after one.
Exactly.
And that especially helps with your shooting form, trigger control, all that stuff.
Breathing, all of it.
Yeah.
All of it.
Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Traditions. As you probably know, 2 years ago they came out with the Nitro Fire in collaboration with Federal Premium and Hodgdon. The Fire Stick, they shoot through those guns. This has really changed muzzleloading and has made it more safer, more accurate. Check them out today at traditionsfirearms.com. So you did talk about larger tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that mostly just for
that? It's again. Some people say you get more adjustment. You shouldn't be using the adjustment anyway. That would be we could do a whole nother podcast on me ranting and raving about people dialing without knowing why they're dialing. I have a personal vendetta against laser bore sighters for most people for that reason. Because you should never be making more than one revolution of adjustment anyway, regardless. As we talk about where the best performance of your optics is, it's in the center of your optical system, which is where it comes when you get it. Every click that you make out of the center of your optical system, you will degrade your optical performance.
I've ruined those scopes.
Is it bad? Does it make them unusable? No.
Right.
But are they optimized? No.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Think it's lenses are all convex or concave, right? So they're designed to go through the azimuth of that face of that glass, and every time you adjust that, you're moving that erector system, so now the light's not going through this, you're off to the side somewhere. You don't want to be doing that. It helps with light management, and I think people are seeing that. A lot of people attribute the larger tubes to more adjustment that they shouldn't be using anyway. Neither here nor there. At the end of the day, it is better light management. Lights, scopes, I'll say this every time because it needs to be said every time. Scopes don't gather light. As an industry, we need to quit using, words have meaning, and if we're going to keep using the wrong word, people are going to have the wrong perception. Scopes don't gather light. They don't have a little coin purse that they run through the field at 4:30 and pick up all this light and then bring it back, and they hold it there and wait for the last 5 minutes so that they transmit the light that is available.
Right.
Period.
Have we reached the max on? I mean, this has been going on for years with you guys coming out with new scopes. We talked about coatings and glass and all this stuff. Is that the peak? I mean, what else can you do?
The coatings got really.
Excuse me.
Everybody's coatings got a lot better about 20 years ago. And we saw several jumps in overall optical performance, and for whatever reason, that coatings code kind of got cracked 20 years ago. There'll be marginal improvements, but it's kind of if you know how optics work, you know how to calculate your exit pupil. Which the number one, and I've said
a story about that too.
I've said it before, and I will continue to repeat it every time you give me a microphone. The number one determining factor in low light performance is exit pupil. If you are not delivering a large enough column of light to your eye in a low light situation, you will not see well. You can take $4,000 rifle scope and put a 1mm exit pupil setting on it, and it will not perform well as a $150 scope with a 4mm exit pupil on it. That should be your goal. The quick and dirty back of the napkin math, take your objective lens, so 40, just because it's easy math. If you have a 4-12 and you turn it to 10, that's a 4mm exit pupil. Divide your objective lens by your magnification. In a low light situation, try to stay above 3.5 or 4. In daylight, no big deal. That's why you can take a 4-32 scope and crank it to 32 on a 56mm lens and shoot prairie dogs that you can see perfectly well during daylight, because your pupils are contracted small enough because there's enough ambient light. You don't need a big column of light. But as your pupils dilate, trying to gather as much light as possible, if you're not matching that column, then you're delivering less light than what your eye is trying to see, and therefore you cannot see it. So maintain your hunting optic. It's why the 3-9 to 40 for so long has been the number one seller, is because even cranked at 9, you got a 4.33 millimeter exit pupil, which is all you ever need. Mm-hmm. So will there be marginal improvements? Yes. But I went through that whole bunny trail to say, how much better does it need to get? Mm-hmm. Because as it is, I can pick up my 10 by 42 binoculars, which have a 4.2 millimeter objective, and I can see better at the end of shooting light or as shooting light is starting than I can with the naked eye. Do I need to be able to see beyond shooting light? I would argue we almost need to put a backstop there to say we don't want these to perform too well.
Now we're starting
because now it's
literally get into a gray area.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So that, and it doesn't matter as much during normal light conditions. It's low light. It's that last. Now for hunters, it's a super valuable 20 minutes of the day. You know, because that's when stuff moves. That's why we are in our stands early and leave our stands late, because I don't know. For me, we're gonna bounce off optics real quick. Which do you prefer more, hunting in the morning or hunting in the evening?
Evening.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
My thought process is, because I work in the industry, so I don't get to hunt near as much as I would like. When I hunt in the morning, as soon as I hit sunrise, every minute after that feels like I'm moving away from the best part of the day.
Yep.
So it's not that I haven't had success in the morning. Mm-hmm. Biggest deer I ever killed was in the morning.
Same here. Yep.
But I also killed him 20 minutes after first shooting light. So every minute past actual sunrise just feels like what? Especially if you're not seeing, like, it's one thing if deer are moving, okay, great.
My answer was because of deer movement.
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part. Depending upon where you're hunting.
I can do a 4-hour sit in the afternoon so much easier than a 4-hour sit in the morning, because it always
light starts leaving.
Then every next minute feels like it's about to be better.
Yes.
As opposed to it's all mental.
Every minute going by is like it's getting worse.
Uh-huh.
I think
exactly.
That was pretty sure that was an NFL player that just walked past us.
That happens here.
That happens here. So, okay, last question for you. I don't know if I should get you riled up on this. But,
please do. I haven't been riled yet.
What your thoughts on night vision shooting?
Night vision and thermal and all of those things are super fun toys. I'm gonna.
He's gonna have to couch his words here.
No, I'm gonna bastardize my answer because it speaks to something that I've ranted on with you previously. I put this in the same place as cellular trail cameras. And there's a big movement against cellular trail cameras, and we're seeing movements against night vision and thermal technology. And if your biggest argument against something is that for lack of a better term, a criminal element could use it for, then take the guns too. Take the knives. Go full London. Take away the bad memes on Facebook. Because if you're take away vehicles. We're a couple weeks away from that. You can go back to walking everywhere. Because if your threshold for the appropriateness of something's use is the worst possible outcome by a bad actor, take away salt. Like, you can make a lethal case for a well-sharpened number 2 pencil. I am disinterested in that kind of bad faith argument. If I want to control predators in my area, I've long since given up non-thermal and night vision hunting because it's cold and lights don't work as well as they should. My answer was to switch to trapping, because that trap can be in the field 24 hours a day. There's a lot of guys that are saying they don't think I can see them, and I can see them, and they are stacking up nest raiders and coyotes because of thermal and night vision. We don't have enough land managers doing that work to roll back the way in which they do that work.
That would be Trent Marsh hanging from the rim on that answer. Because I could not have scripted that any better. It was an excellent take, and it was something that I've thought, but I couldn't have put it as eloquently as you just did.
Well,
it's true.
I've been spun up about that kind of stuff for a long while.
We could. I'm not going to go off on it, but we could go off on it. It's the same argument with crossbow hunting. Mm-hmm. It's the same argument.
In Indiana, it was the same as rifles.
Rifles.
Over the course of 5 years.
You were shotgun only, right?
Yeah, over the course of 5 years, Indiana went from crossbows only for handicap and shotgun only to
all inclusion on archery.
All inclusion on archery and wide open floodgates for rifles on private ground. We're still straight wall.
Did it decimate the deer herd? No.
What decimated the deer herd, get off on a separate tangent, is an absolutely archaic Indiana 2-buck tag system that hasn't caught up to the fact that we've been a 1-buck state for 30 years, mm-hmm. even though our tag system, they just keep tacking on bubblegum and duct tape to the backside of the regulations. And for years, you had counties that you could buy 6 or 8 bonus antlerless tags, and they're doing great work. But 6 or 8 doe tags for a bunch of hunters that love being in the woods, when you have hunters feeding the hungry, say, just donate and we'll take care of it. That is what hurt the deer herd, not the manner in which they were taken. The trends, if you look at the harvest trends in Indiana, 80% of the deer killed in Indiana are going to die before lunch on the opening Saturday of firearm season. Whether that's 12 gauge or 6.5, doesn't matter. The trends are the same. But you talk to any deer hunters around, and the numbers just aren't there. But we never saw a $250,000 deer or 250 deer harvest in Indiana. Mm-hmm. It was this 140, right. 140, 140, 130, 120, 110, and yeah, it had nothing to do with the weapons. It had everything to do with the fact that you just had a lot of guys out shooting does.
And you had a lot of extra. It's the same everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, Trent, thank you so much. That was slightly abbreviated for you and me, mm-hmm. But I really appreciate all the information. Again, everybody, we're going to put that link to some of Trent's articles. He's written some great ones for the magazine. And if you don't subscribe to the magazine, it's like $15. You get it delivered to your door. Not a better deal than that. It's right there on our website. We'll put that in there, too. Trent, a little fist bump here. We will catch you again. It's RightOnOptics.com.
RightOnOptics.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram.
They're all over social.
You can find us.
You can find their optics at various retail places.
Check your local retailer, and you can always go to RightOnOptics.com.
You can buy them direct.
Yep, 100%.
Very cool. Very good products, too. I've been using them on the TV show. You can see those on Pursuit Channel. So, for Trent Marsh, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Deer Talk Now. We will catch you next Thursday for another brand new episode.